They tied her body to the stake, but it was already over. Her voice had been silenced, her bones trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion. Yet it was not enough. Death, they had decided, would not suffice. She would not merely burn, she would be destroyed twice, first in body, then in remembrance. The fire rose with purpose, devouring her legs, curling her arms into themselves, blackening her skin into parchment. Her screams, at first sharp and singular, dissolved into the crackle of consuming timber. But when the fire withdrew, its task complete, what remained was not silence. It was a heart, whole, unburned, lying in the ashes as if untouched. The crowd fell quiet. The priests turned pale. That heart, still there amid the soot and bone, became a problem. So they did it again. They set fire to her remains a second time, not to end her life, she had none left, but to erase her entirely, to reduce her to dust so complete that no relic, no rib, no symbol of sanctity might survive. This was not an execution. This was obliteration. An erasure so final it required repetition. They feared what might be done with what was left, that her ashes might be collected, that her bones might be touched, kissed, kept, that her story might grow rather than die. So they scattered her second fire into the Seine, carried away not just by current, but by intention, to leave nothing behind but fear. But the fear was never hers. It belonged to them, to the men who built the pyre, to the bishops who recited the liturgy, to the captains who approved the sentence. They feared her because she had not asked permission. She had not waited for doctrine. She had spoken with the certainty of thunder and claimed it came from God. A girl, illiterate, barefoot, provincial, had outshouted kings. And they knew killing her once would never be enough, because she had already passed into myth, and myths do not bleed. So they burned her again, not because she was still dangerous, but because she still existed. She was born in a village that barely existed. Domremy, an unremarkable speck in the contested eastern frontier of France, had no nobility, no cathedrals, no history of saints. Her father was a tenant farmer. Her mother could not write her own name. The house was built of wattle and timber, the roof sagging, the hearth forever hungry. And yet, from this soil, a phenomenon emerged, not shaped by schooling, not guided by clergy, but summoned, she said, by voices, celestial ones, first faint, then relentless, voices of saints who called her by name and gave her no option but purpose. She was 12, not a prophet, not yet a threat, just a girl who heard what no one else could. She did not claim visions of comfort, she claimed commands. She was told to lead, to crown, to liberate. It was not spiritual healing she was instructed to bring, but war. And when she resisted, when she doubted her own unworthiness, the voices did not soothe. They insisted. France was bleeding. God had chosen her. And soon, the urgency within her voice would eclipse the doubts of others, not because they believed her, but because in a country fractured by decades of war, even impossible hope can feel preferable to despair. France in 1429 was not a nation. It was a corpse picked apart by vultures. The English claimed the throne. The Burgundians betrayed their blood. The Dauphin, Charles, lacked both army and authority. His court was a circus of scheming nobles and bitter priests. Into this arena, Joan appeared, dressed in men's clothes, illiterate, speaking boldly, claiming God's direct instruction, and asking, no, demanding to be taken to the king. She was 16. They tried to dismiss her, mock her, dismiss her as deluded. But she endured. She passed theological examination, withstood interrogation, and when they relented and allowed her to speak with Charles, something happened. History records it only as a private meeting. What she said to him has been lost. But when it ended, he wept, and he sent her to war. She did not lead with swords. She led with certainty. She rode into battle not behind the men, but before them, carrying a banner, not a blade. She was injured. She recovered. She wept. She prayed. And she won. Orléans, long besieged, was broken open beneath her presence. The tide turned. Morale surged. The French, exhausted and humiliated, found in her not just courage but legitimacy. This was not strategy. This was symbol, and symbols terrify systems more than swords ever can. The coronation of Charles at Reims, made possible by Joan's campaign, should have secured her. Instead, it doomed her. For the same voices that had elevated her now made her inconvenient. She had fulfilled her purpose. She had given the crown to its rightful head, but she would not stop. She asked for more troops, more campaigns. She wanted Paris. She wanted Burgundy. But the court hesitated. The priests fretted, and the king grew cold. She was too popular, too independent, too devout in a way they could not control. She confessed to no mortal authority. She answered only to heaven, and heaven had no use for protocol. The girl, who had once been a miracle, now became a liability. Her victories no longer convenient. Her presence, especially in armor, speaking to men as equals, no longer tolerable. When she was captured, no rescue came, no ransom paid, no riders sent, because the truth was they needed her gone more than they needed her free. And the English? They did not see a girl. They saw a precedent. One they would shatter in flames. She was captured not by her enemies, but by her countrymen. In May of 1430, at the gates of Compiègne, Joan of Arc was thrown from her horse and surrounded. The Burgundians, nominally French but allied with the English, took her into custody. She expected ransom, perhaps negotiation. That was the law. That was custom. That was how nobles were treated. But Joan was not noble. She was a woman in armor, a woman who had disrupted lineage, humiliated enemies, and dared to claim direct communion with God. So there was no negotiation. She was sold like livestock, the price 10,000 livres, not for freedom, for delivery. The French court did not intervene. The king she had crowned made no appeal. No envoy was sent. Charles VII, now legitimized by her sacrifices, did not lift a finger to protect her, because to defend Joan was to be reminded of a truth he wanted buried, that his crown had been carried by a peasant girl who had heard voices. So instead, he watched and waited as she was handed over to the English and vanished into the bowels of their jurisdiction. They placed her on trial, but not before the state, before the church. A calculated move. Her military victories were not their concern. Her politics irrelevant. This was about doctrine, heresy, cross-dressing, blasphemy. They sought not to condemn her strategies but her soul. The English dared not martyr her by the sword. They needed to crush her spiritually, to reframe her triumphs as sin. So they convened a trial under ecclesiastical law, led by Bishop Pierre Cauchon, a Frenchman loyal to English aims. It was theatre, masked as theology. She was kept in an English prison, guarded by men, denied a confessor. She was isolated, interrogated, threatened with torture. She faced over 100 charges, later reduced to 12, then condensed again into 1, that her visions were not divine but diabolical. Her judges twisted her every word. When she claimed her voices came from God, they said she was mad. When she claimed they came from saints, they said she was arrogant. When she dressed in men's clothes, as she always had for protection, for authority, they said she rejected her womanhood. The trial was not about faith, it was about obedience, and she refused to yield. Yet even then, she did not break. For months, they attempted to extract a confession, not of her actions, but of her soul's corruption. They wanted her to say that the saints had lied, that she had been deceived, that her victories were not miracles, but manipulations. She refused. She knew the cost, but she also knew the stakes. To recant was to damn herself. To admit falsehood was to erase the voices that had defined her life. Eventually, under threat of immediate burning, sleep-deprived, starved and alone, she signed a document. She confessed, or so they claimed. The document itself was likely forged or altered. She may not have understood it. She could not read. Regardless, the judges proclaimed her saved, from fire, if not from shame. They promised life imprisonment, penance, silence. But Joan could not remain silent. Within days, she resumed wearing men's clothes, not as rebellion, but as armor. The guards had assaulted her, touched her. She begged for female supervision, denied. And so, in self-defense, she returned to the clothes they had forbidden. Her judges declared this relapse. Heresy revived. She had broken her abjuration, and so they sentenced her, finally, to death. But not just death, to be burned alive, in the town square of Rouen, where every citizen could watch the state reclaim its order by destroying the girl who had undone it. It was still morning when they led her out. May 30th, 1431. Rouen was silent, not from mourning, but anticipation. The square was prepared, elevated so all could see. The wood was piled high, seasoned and dry. This was not a spontaneous burning. It was designed for clarity, for optics, for permanence. Her garments had been replaced with a simple robe. Her feet were bound, her hands chained. She asked for a cross. A sympathetic soldier gave her one made from broken sticks. A priest followed, holding a crucifix aloft. She clutched it. She repeated the name of Christ. She asked for absolution. It was granted. Then they tied her to the post. She stood above the crowd, eyes fixed on the sky, lips moving in prayer. But the wind betrayed her. It blew the smoke into her face. The flames began low, lapping at the base of the pyre. Then they climbed. The wood cracked. Her robe blackened. The ropes burned first, releasing her weight downward until the chains caught. Her body arched as the fire reached her legs. She screamed. Not briefly, not politely, not once. She screamed with the full horror of a body undone by heat. Her skin split, her flesh blistered, her lungs filled with smoke, then failed. But it was not enough. When the fire died, something remained. A body, charred but recognizably human. And at its center her heart, intact. Witnesses testified to it. The very people who demanded her death now feared what had survived it. The heart, untouched, refused to burn. The priests panicked. The English commanders demanded the body be consumed. The executioner, trembling, refused to touch what remained. He claimed it would not burn, that the fire recoiled from her. The people stared, not in awe, but in fear. They had come for a heretic. But what they saw looked dangerously like a martyr. So they did it again. They gathered what was left and burned it anew, this time not for punishment, but for erasure. They incinerated her a second time, with more wood, more oil, more violence, until there was nothing. No heart, no bone, no ash distinguishable from dust. And then, to ensure no relic could be taken, they collected the remains in a cart and dumped them into the Seine. The river would carry her away, into mud, into oblivion. But water does not forget. Her voice had echoed through war camps and battlefields. Her prayers had once changed the direction of kings, and now her silenced body was a whisper in the current. She had no grave, no stone, no tomb for mourners. Just a place in memory they tried to flood. But fire does not end truth, and rivers do not carry shame away. They carry it forward. They burned her alive. Then they burned what was left, not because she was evil, but because they feared she was holy. They thought the fire would finish her, that the flames would silence what they could not control. But fire is only final if no one remembers. And Joan of Arc was remembered. not as the heretic they condemned, but as something more dangerous, an idea that would not stay buried. Decades after her ashes vanished into the Seine, whispers returned. Eyewitnesses recanted. Clergy repented. In 1456, the Church reopened her case. And what they found was not a mad woman, not a liar, not a witch, but a manipulated girl betrayed by her king, sold by her allies, and executed by the very faith she believed had sent her. They declared her innocent. Then they declared her holy. But the reparation came too late. Her body was gone, her voice reduced to transcript and hearsay, and yet that voice kept rising, across centuries, across continents. Joan of Arc became a symbol not of obedience, but of defiance sanctified. A saint who wielded a sword, a virgin in armor, a teenager who stood before kings and claimed divine instruction. And in doing so, she exposed what power fears most. Not violence, but clarity. Not rebellion, but righteousness unapproved. They burned her once to kill her. They burned her again to destroy the idea. But the idea survived. Because fire does not erase conviction, it exposes it. And in the heat of that exposure, the state revealed itself, not as protector of order, but as assassin of conscience. They feared her not because she was wrong, but because she was unanswerable. And history, whether it prays to saints or not, remembers what it cannot contain. If you want to hear more of the stories they tried to bury, subscribe. We don't just remember, we reveal.